Dear youth researchers, dear panelists, dear young people in the audience, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome on the YAR knowledge sharing meeting addressing the impact of COVID-19 on youth and actually the research to action regional session, well-being, technology and rights in Europe and North America. Welcome, and first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Anita Nikolovska, and I will be your moderator on today's session. I come from Skopje, North Macedonia, which is a small country in the Western Balkan region in Europe. I'm part of the UNESCO pool of youth trainers since last year, and moreover, I'm youth activist, volunteer, researcher, and youth trainer who is especially passionate on the topic of addressing youth issues related to mental health and youth well-being. So I'm extremely glad to be your moderator in this session today, and I hope we will have fruitful discussion in the next hour and a half. Yesterday, we had the knowledge sharing session where we listened to the presentations of the research teams that has been done, that have been conducting research in Europe and North America for the last year. And today we are having the research to action session. Actually, these sessions will provide an opportunity for young researchers and the wider participants which are here today with us to interact with policy specialists from across the region. Therefore, this will be a dialogue that will enable discussion on the best way to turn the research that has already been done and the research findings into action and policy. So today we're going to discuss practical ways to action that the research will gain the attention of policymakers. We're also going to address the barriers that young people in the region face in accessing policy spaces. And of course, we are going to create an informed dialogue with policymakers on the YAR policy conference, which is going to happen in hopefully December this year. I welcome you all, and just wanted to let you know that this session is open and all the participants are welcome. And you can participate in following ways. So you can chat during the session in the chat box that Zoom is providing. You can also submit question for discussion in the fishbowl session later on, and also you can join the fishbowl and engage in the debate. So before we start with our guests today, I'm going to just briefly go through the findings and actually through the comments that were discussed on yesterday's session. So during the yesterday's session, we had 4 YAR teams who presented their research work and findings. So, but also we had our technical advisors, Dr. Kate and Mr. Harry, who commented on both of the presentations and the preliminary findings of all the teams that were included in the draft briefing notes. So they both commented on the young participants, on the quality of their research, acknowledging how challenging it was to conduct social science research online and with the barriers that we are all facing and the pandemic has caused. So I will go through quickly through the main findings and to what was discussed yesterday. The focus on empathy is critically needed, and the YAR research is especially pointing on that. So we all agree that more investment and advocacy is needed for academia and researchers to focus on empathy and youth, particularly given the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on youth mental health. Of course, it is important to further support approaches and initiatives that will build the capacities of young people to collect and analyze data and perceptions of youth with youth. So, moreover, we all agree that a universal European approach can be pursued in ensuring a minimum threshold and capacity for all the universities in Europe to provide relevant, up-to-date and tailored mental health support to all categories of students, regardless their background or other socio-demographic characteristics. The recommendation of the YAR team was actually that schools should provide classes on using social media as an informed, strategic and non-toxic way, which will provide the skills for young people to manage their online time and thinking critically about information encountered. But the question that also remains is how can we convince school that this is an important topic? I hope that we can hear some that we will have discussion on this topic as well. Very interesting was that the YAR teams look at the correlation between young people using social media and mental health issues. So it is important to understand why do youth go to social media when they're traversing difficult periods and when they opt out of them as well. It is critical to continue research on the correlation between mental health issues and the use of technology. In response, all the participants agreed that the investment in sensitizing and training broadcasters on youth-specific issues and themes is critical. And also the speakers suggested that youth can mobilize youth audiences through their organizations, through the social media and the related constituencies, which will advocate and ask for more positive representations of youth in the media. There is also a need to provide opportunities, including upskilling, training, and direct investments in creating and providing woman-owned enterprises. This can be supported by local and national governments and also community leaders. And finally, in terms of youth's access to information on COVID-19, it was recognized that there is a need to make young people realize the importance of trusted sources. At the same time, speakers stressed that the responsibility of the governments in making sure that public institutions are the custodians of trustworthy information, and also that they provide sufficient resources and processes in place so that youth can access trustworthy and reliable sources. So these were the main findings from yesterday's knowledge sharing session report. And I guess that these are only the quotes that I give you, and that will encourage you to discuss further on the questions. In the next session, we have panelists who are engaging in the research to action session, and they play a critical role in determining the quality of the interactions and the discussion on policy opportunities. So the expertise of the panelists is requested to stimulate the young researchers to think about their research findings and how they might be applied in policy and on the ground. So in the following couple minutes, we will hear three panelists who are going to introduce themselves and also comment on the researches that have been done, and also how these findings can be applied in policy and on the ground. So as a first panelist, I would like to welcome and introduce Dr. Serena Anghioli, who is the director in the programs department of Agenzia Nazionale Giovanni and comes from Italy. Mrs. Serena, please join the discussion and give us your thoughts about the main findings. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Anita, and also all the participants and my colleague panelists. It's really a great pleasure to be here for me. I'm coming from Rome. I'm working in a public body. It's called Agenzia, in Italian language is Agenzia Nazionale per i Giovani, which is a national agency for youth. And we are, this agency is, in Italy, is a public body, and we have a sort of same organization in all the member states of the European Union. Sometimes they're not organized as a public body, but as NGO or other statute. But what is linking each other is that we are responsible in our country of the implementation of the two European programs for youth. It means European Solidarity Corps and Erasmus, the part related with youth field, within the youth field. And so my experience in this area concerning, let's say, youth engagement, if you want, in the society, and my experience is based on also on one political experience that I had. It was some years ago. I was member of a regional government in Italy, and I was delegated for youth policy, and I worked also as local level. So I'm very interested in the implementation of the political decisions, and also in promoting it. And the topic that where I'm asked to be here today is for me very interesting, because it's very let's say are really the topic of the next years. And we are poor in terms of knowledge based information, because the phenomenon of COVID is quite recent. And so all the persons who are involved in youth policy cannot avoid the impact of COVID, and which is not only in terms of mental health, but in behavior, in a lifestyle, and a lot of area. So I'm very proud to be invited to this session, because for me it's always interesting to listen what youth are doing. And just to close my introduction, I will say that we are instrument of the implementation of the European Youth Strategy, and the Youth Strategy asked us to encourage the youth participation, and to implement opportunities that grow up the youth voice. So what you have done with research, with these researchers, is very interesting, maybe should be improved and so on, but is innovative, important, it comes from youth, so is to be taken into consideration. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Dr. Serena, for your introduction and words on the topic. As a next panelist, I would like to invite Senator Mary Siri Kearney from Ireland. Senator, welcome to this session. Please introduce yourself and give us a couple of words on the topic and the researchers that have been done.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you for the honor of inviting me and having me here today. My name is Mary Siri Kearney. I am a senator. The Irish Parliament is a bicameral parliament, and I'm a senator in the upper house. Our government is a coalition government made up of 3 parties, and the second largest of those is Fine Gael. So I am the Fine Gael Seanad, which is the name of our upper parliament, the Seanad spokesperson for children, disability, equality, integration, youth affairs, and privacy rights. So I suppose I'm particularly taken by the topics and the discussion here today, because it hits a lot of the things that I would spend my working day doing and talking about. Throughout I suppose the time of COVID, I have been very sensitive to the lack of youth voice. That it began in the beginning with almost an accusation of young people as vectors of COVID and to be avoided, and then we evolved out of that as the evidence of how COVID was transmitted and all of that came through, and so then it became that young people were losing rites of passage and opportunities and developmental milestones, and not reaching those, or not having that experience. Even the so-called simplicity of being the senior person in the senior class in a school, that whole experience was lost when people were being educated from home. So at one point I brought forward a private member's motion on youth issues in the context of COVID, where as a parliament we discussed and raised awareness of the losses to young people as a consequence of COVID, and ensuring that their voices were front and center. And one of the assurances and one of the outcomes of that was to make sure that we were listening to youth voices. I'm a member of a joint Oireachtas committee, which is the two chambers coming together in a committee on children and youth affairs, as well as equality, disability and integration. And we had young people into our committee to tell us that their experiences of COVID and how it affected their mental health and the perceptions of them and their perceptions of being enabled to live their lives and and getting the opportunities that should go with their age and be commensurate with the experiences that they should have given their age. So I find your findings very, I could go on. I'm very much into privacy rights, the effect of social media. By profession, prior to being parliamentarian, I am a barrister practicing in privacy law and employment law. So that aspect of it, I'm really looking forward to discussing with you. I'll end it there because I could go on, but I won't.
Thanks a lot, Senator Mary. As next panelist and last for this session, I would invite Ms. Elena Petrova, who is coordinator of projects from the Russian Red Cross coming from the Russian Federation. Ms. Elena.
Warm greetings from Russia, dear colleagues. My name is Elena Petrova. I work all my professional life with youth, with young volunteers, and one of my main responsibilities in Russian Red Cross is developing and arranging youth and educational programs for our Red Cross youth movement. Like all national societies, I mean Red Cross and Red Crescent societies, the Russian Red Cross work for, with, and by youth. Because youth is traditionally active part of the population, young people participate in a lot of our activities such as social assistance, educational programs, and emergency response. The COVID-19 pandemic has become a challenge and a test for a lot of humanitarian and not-profit organizations. We had to find ways how to help and support critical vulnerable groups in context of physical isolation, high infection risk, and general instability. So I absolutely agree with the key points and suggestions raised yesterday. As Red Cross, Red Crescent societies, we believe that humanity and sympathy can be learned. Now we can see increasing demand for psychosocial support and program for mental health. We see it. It's really, we can see last years, we have no mental health program, only drug abuse program or HIV prevention program, but now it's really high demand. In our work, we use the concept of vulnerability for something and based on our action. But now in the current situation, everyone is vulnerable, especially young people. We as large humanitarian organization must strengthen supporting projects to keep the mental health of our young people, including using social media. And today I would like to share shortly with you the unique initiative called "We Are Together," in Russian it's "Мы вместе," an idea that has united the whole country. Our leader, Pavel Savchuk, was one of the organizers of this campaign, which united the efforts of federal, state youth structures, non-profit organizations such, for example, medical volunteers and Red Cross, and entire population of our country. The main goal of the activity is to help elderly and physically challenged people, as well to assist medical institutions affected by COVID-19 pandemic. Just like many other organizations, we had a wave of spontaneous volunteerism. At the beginning of this pandemic, people around wanted to take a part in helping those who are more vulnerable. A requirement for volunteer participation was two-stage training, held first part offline and second offline in regional offices and centers. And during their participation, our volunteers had psychosocial support PSP and took a part in mutual support groups. The Russian Red Cross was and is an active participant in the "We Are Together" campaign. In need, Russian Red Cross have joined regional centers to work in big team and to strengthen common activity. Our hotlines turned out to be so in demand that they continue their work today. So social support is still provided. Besides, these people in need are consulted on how receive some social benefits and of course to receive first psychological support in their crisis situation. And I would like to mention, as in the beginning of my speech, now we see increase and develop of mutual support groups for volunteers. This practice really began in the earliest time at the beginning of the pandemic and continues to this day. And now we learned we should pay more attention to emotional and mental conditions of our volunteers. Thank you for inviting me, and I would like to answer any questions.
Thank you as well, Ms. Elena, and thank you for sharing with us your experience. And I hope that you have motivated our youth teams to ask questions based on your experience. Now I would like to give you just a quick brief on how you can participate in this session. So all of the participants. So do you have a question that you want to ask to the policy advisors? You want to find out more about how to overcome the barriers that young people face in making their voices heard. You can submit your questions and also you can enter into the discussion. We have young people from Utah's researchers teams and the wider audience of participants, and you're all invited to join the discussion with our selected group of policy advisors from across the region. So actually, the session will use a fishbowl format where young people can enter the circle of speakers in the fishbowl, ask their questions, and engage in discussions. We have our three panelists who will be here with us until the end of the session and try to give you recommendations, try to answer your question in order to find the best solutions, how to deal with these problems and how to address this research findings into action. So now I can see that we have, yes, I have a few questions that you may find useful when posting your question. In order not to read them, I will just add it to the chat so everyone can see it. And please think of this guidelines when you ask your question. So you can also write it in the chat or the Q&A part of the discussion, and also I will share with them and invite you to speak. So first of all, we have the first round of the fishbowl are the youth researchers. So we have with us Francesco Foglia from Italy, who is I guess who is having the first question related to our guests. So Francesco, please briefly introduce yourselves and you can ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much again for this additional opportunity to present our findings and share with the panelists of a high level. I am Francesco Foglia from Italy and from Europe team, and currently I am PhD candidate in global studies and global governance. In our research, we investigated the impact of the media portrayal on young people behavior among during the pandemic, the impact on their well-being and mental health. And we found that the civic engagement did not make young people more resilient in facing the negative media representation, the media coverage. On the contrary, those who are committed or engaged is exposed to a greater likelihood of being emotionally affected by the news coverage. Then I would like to ask the policymakers, as you are leading organization at national or international level that promotes younger youth engagement, what is your opinion about the media, about the tone the media used when talking about young people during the pandemic? And if has there been a polarized media representation of the negative behavior of young people, or is it just what young people think about? Thank you for any feedback.
Thank you, Francesco, on your question. So anyone from our panelists that would like to answer the question, that would like to briefly comment on what has Francesco said until now? Please feel free just to unmute yourself and speak. Senator Mary, you're welcome.
I think that there was a very biased media I suppose a focus on young people. I think that it was very unfair last year when the colleges came back. There was a media focus on some groups coming together, you know, and socializing together. There was a huge number of articles, photographs, social media postings of those group of young people. And while it's preferable that people weren't when we were in the middle of a you know, a rising wave of COVID, it would be preferable if people weren't socializing, but it gave an impression of young people as being reckless, full stop, which was an appalling portrayal and misinformation, because the vast majority, and I would even go as far as to say 95% were adhering, there was very little transmission. The rates of COVID and all of that through the colleges and through schools was extremely low. The rate of adherence to wearing face masks in schools, there was no resistance to that. There was no major problems with that. So I think that it must have felt extremely unfair on the vast majority of young people who were being portrayed and categorized and stereotyped as being reckless and uncaring, when in actual fact, they were mindful of vulnerable people at home. In a lot of cases, there were young people were the carers, had to step up while parents were working from home and working remotely. They had to step in and mind younger siblings or older relations. They were visiting and seeing their relations through windows and from a distance, and being incredibly responsible. And so it was one of the reasons that motivated my private member's motion, was to make sure that we got the opportunity to articulate all that was being said to me by young people and how unfair they felt that. So I can understand why they would have found that very, very upsetting. And as parliamentarians, I think it was our job to put a balance back into that and to push back and to challenge. I think the problem with media, that the print media is in competition with social media, and the more sensationalist the story, then that gets clicks, that gets, you know, people will pursue that. And that is something that parliamentarians need to push back on and need to stand, and part of our roles is to stand up and speak the truth and to speak what is. So it is important that young people have a conduit to speaking to us, having that voice. My own party has a youth wing called Young Fine Gael that operate completely independently of the senior party, and also contact us to tell us how they want us to be represented, you know, and to represent them, what policies they want, how they want that. So I think that there are means by which political activism could redress that balance and that wrongful portrayal of young people.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Senator Mary, on your explanation. I can also see that Dr. Serena is raising a hand. Dr. Serena, if you'd like to comment.
No, just a few words, because a lot of things has already been said from the Senator Mary. But just say that from my point of view, the media, the institutional media, let's say, because there are different kind of media, different kind of communication. So I would like just to speak concerning the institutional communication. In Italy, I think that was very aggressive, and especially at the beginning, in the first phases of COVID, probably in view to justify some action, some political decision. I will not enter in this debate, but just to answer the question that Francesco asked about the communication, the role of the media, and the relation between the actual impact that we register through researchers and analyzing the youth behavior and also of the other people. But we are facing a great insecurity in the society. And I have the impression that media were not ready to use a specific language oriented toward youth people. Is not opportune from my point of view to use the same way when you have to speak to young people, to youth, to and to old people or to adults. Is not the same thing. You can have different impact, and the fact that everybody was close at home, and that probably the television was not the first media that the youth that they were used to listen to, usually when they had the opportunity to go out, not to be surrounded at home. So it means that at the same time, all generations receive the same, not the same content, because the same content is normal, is obvious, but the way how you produce the communication, the information, and I think that it's a big responsibility of this data that you find out, like anxiety, problems, insecurity, difficulties to sleep, and so on, because it's a responsibility also of how you communicate right information, not wrong information. This is another point. But let's say, supposing that all the news were right, there is it should be. I think that we should, the public body should implement the right communication when it's addressed to youth people, and I think that this experience was missing. It's not. It's because we are happy and we are very lucky that we have not the habits of having pandemic each year. So obviously, the specialists of communication should also be aware. They have to be trained in this in view of this objective, to inform in the right way different generations. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Serena, on your response. Miss Elena, yes, of course.
From my side, of course, I always think like a volunteer leader, and for me, volunteerism is the answer for any questions. And if we talk about a positive image of young people, then just a good example is the actions that I mentioned before. We have a lot of publication in our official media and social media about young volunteers, how they help. And the research that has been conducted after main period of the campaign, We Are Together, it shows that more than 19% of Russians trust young volunteers. So they saw youth as helpers in difficult pandemic situation who responded to the call. And I think we can show more examples of young volunteers, their social impact in our community, in our society.
Thank you, Ms. Elena. Thank you to all the panelists that have discussed and answered your questions. So next we have Also, one more participant from the North America research team, Rochelle Bajai. Rochelle, I hope that you have a question to ask, so take the floor, please.
Great, thank you so much. It's great seeing everyone from yesterday again, and to all of our panelists, thank you so much for coming and for providing us the opportunity to speak to you. A little bit about me: I just graduated from the University of Pittsburgh, originally from the East Coast of North America, but I now live on the West Coast, and so I'm the only representative from my team today, but I know that they all enjoyed the project as well, so thank you for that. And our research topic concerned about what types of media sources youth accessed, and how, and these are North America, like United States, media outlets, but what type of news sources they accessed versus, the resulting impact it had on their behavior and mental well-being. And what we found was that although youth did look towards government bodies for trusted information, it wasn't their first accessed news source. Social media was, which we can all imagine why. And so my question pertained around, one of our survey questions asked them what they do in order to relax and for their mental health, what you do. And out of our respondents, the least amount said they practice meditation or mindfulness. And, a large part, while we weren't able to probe further, sort of our understanding is that a large part of it is that they may not know how, because it's not really taught, within the school curriculum from a young age. Meditation or mindfulness isn't really focused on. As policymakers, where do you see the scope and potential for all these new startup companies, like the ones in EdTech and MedTech, who are focusing on the mindfulness mental health space via the use of technology in our virtual environment? Where do you see the government can come in to partner with them to subsidize at a lower cost, specifically for sort of more of the underprivileged populations? And hopefully that'll alleviate some of the cost. Where do you see the government's role in terms of educating youth about mindfulness from an early age? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rochelle, on your question. Anyone that wants to respond and to answer from our panelists, please feel free to do it.
As you can hear, I've got bells going on in the background, which are calling people to votes. And that doesn't apply to me. I have an exemption for this evening, but I'll go last, if you don't mind, of the three of us, because then the bell will have finished.
Yes, sure, no problem.
May?
Yes, of course.
For my plenary things, we as NGO, is public organization, we can, I think it works in other country as Russia, we can create some pilot project and try to use in schools, in local schools, and evaluate the impact of this small project. And after that, we can offer results of this project to our governments and ask to include these, I hope, good examples, good practice in all country school curricula, for example. Because as NGO, we very flexible. We can test other approaches, other methodologies, and I think it's a huge role for NGO in all world to create, to develop some new tools for school curriculum.
Thank you, Ms. Elena. Dr. Serena, maybe if you'd like to comment on this.
Yes, okay. I think that the role of the policymaker, generally speaking, is to provide opportunity that could let grow up experiences and valorize the results of experiences. And in the perspective to do it, it is important to know very well the environment where you are working. For example, if it's a school, if it's a university, or an environment rich of social experience, and a suburb of an urban area, or whatever you want. You should have tailor-made tools to be implemented, and also to valorize the experience that you can reach, for example, thanks to the experience that Elena told, through the NGO, youth organizations, or the social organization, and create opportunity, because they are working underground with people, with many different people, and it is important that these experience can be studied and brought to the formal world, formal area, like the sector of a university, or school instruction or education. So because through the experience and what you are saying before concerning also the opportunity of sharing experience among youth, but in view to allow that this experience can become part of an educational program. It means that the adults also should be aware. So all the mechanisms should work in a good way, because sometimes you have to separate way two or more than two, maybe 3, 4, and so on. So you have the world of youth people that they found difficulties to break this wall and to let enter in the area where they can bring their knowledge, their demand, their answers also sometimes. So I think that the role of politicians is mainly the one, not that they have to solve for the problem directly. Sometimes yes, but sometimes it's more difficult to create all the conditions, because of this good and important experience contribution coming from youth. Let have the opportunity to be listened, to be worked, and to be reinvested in it. So this is not easy tasks. It's not easy, very easy task. So all these bridges should be provided by the policy and by this opportunity, like this one of the UNESCO that you are doing now. It has a big educational approach. It has inside not only participation activities, but also it has an important educational contribution, I think, for everybody. So I think this is one good example.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Serena, as well. And now we have the Senator Mary.
Okay, I can come back in now. It's gone quiet in the background. I think, I mean, looking at your draft recommendations of, that trusted government bodies should expand their social media presence. I think that we have, and the others, but just taking that, research has told us that young people take far more of their information from social media rather than the sources that would traditionally, that my generation would have maybe watched the 6 o'clock news, would have, bought a newspaper. And so as we move more into a technology-based, that social media becomes a source of information. I personally find that a really frightening thought. And I heard statistics aired on that recently, which were really quite frightening, the level of misinformation as a consequence. So I think that from a government perspective, we need to be constantly articulating that there is a responsibility of social media to ensure that they are curating their platform to ensure that the information on there is accurate. And then that government themselves occupy that social media space, but being sure that the social media channels that they're using are appropriate ones. So the Facebook is perhaps linked into a particular age group now, that's more probably closer to me than to my daughter. So making sure that they're up on social media, the correct social media platforms to be putting out information. Certainly the Irish government moved to broadcasting on TikTok and trying to get our health message and getting people bought into vaccinations to combat the misinformation and disinformation out there by going on TikTok. But then another more subtle methodology that was used was that government recruited social media influencers. And as recently as today, one of my colleagues here in the Seanad has called for sports stars in Ireland to step forward, who have been vaccinated, to step forward to counter some of the positions that are coming out of UK-based sports stars refusing the vaccination. There is we have over 90% of the people over 18 in Ireland are vaccinated and have bought in. But for those residual, or for people who are nervous or who are listening, we've had the horrific incident of a person being removed from hospital by an extremist group, and that family being frightened into removing their person, and that person has gone on to die. So we need to combat the fact that there is, and maybe we need to first recognize that there is an agenda of misinformation and disinformation. And I found that for a number of years very difficult to believe that people would set out to deliberately thwart the information that people were receiving. But as soon as we embrace it, acknowledge it, then we are empowered to say, well, look, we recognize that young people are moving in different media circles than we would, and we've got to move and listen to them, ask them what spaces are you occupying, where are you getting your information from, and then utilize that to act accordingly and be responsible and keep up with it. Keep up with where young people and where the messaging is at and needs to be. And I think then on a government level, we need legislation for the responsibility for the message. If the Irish Times publishes a message and it's wrong, they will be caught by the defamation laws, and there will be ways of dealing with that. Unfortunately, social media platforms aren't so culpable, and there is a lacuna in law across all of the world, and we're seeing it coming out in the hearings at the moment with Francis Sagan in the US, that there is a need then to start putting in very severe regulation that oblige social media companies to take responsibility for the misinformation and the effect that has on mental health of people of all ages, but particularly young people who are forming their own identity and their own sense of self-confidence and who they are in the world and their contribution to the world. And we don't need social media knocking that. And lastly, because sorry, I love this. And lastly, one of the things that we tried, and this goes to your point, Rochelle, one of the things that we tried was we moved to a number of different of text support, of peer support for mental health and well-being, for looking at, some of them, Minding Wellbeing was one of the campaigns that were run, and we brought in counsellors to provide free counselling services during COVID to reach out, and then that was put out on media channels, the fact that it was available and it was free. The Minister for Higher Education launched a 24/7 text helpline that if anyone needed support in their mental health, that they could text a number and somebody would come back to them and enter into chat with them, and they could either do text chat or email, or actually speak to a physical person if they needed to. And then face-to-face counselling support was provided free of charge by the Department of Health as well, in recognition of the mental well-being. But I think your point of partnering with private sector enterprises and innovations, that's a really important thing that we need to do.
Thank you so much. Ireland sounds great.
Thank you all of you for the feedback. I'm really happy that we have such great discussion going on. And as a last from the research teams, we have Asia Buono, who is also from the team of researchers from Europe, who actually has 2 questions, and later on we will continue with the questions from the audience. So I will also like to encourage you once again to post your questions in the chat box so we can address them during the session. Asia, welcome to the session, and please ask your question.
Yes, thank you so much, Anita, for facilitating, and thank you to Serena, Elena, and Mary as well for your expertise. So it's lovely to meet you. I'm Asia, and I am the research lead for the Europe Youth team. I'm based in Ireland myself. And our topic was mental health and social media usage during COVID-19. So we researched young people who used different social media platforms and how that affected their mental health. And a lot of that was the spread of news, which I know has been covered already in this session. But my 2 questions that I have are actually, the first one, I guess it might be based a little bit on my working background. So I've been working in fundraising for 3 years. So my first question is actually, what do you guys think is the main reason for the lack of funding for counselling services in universities? And also, what do you think would be a good step to making sure that the funding for those services can increase? And so I know that in different countries it's different. I'd love to hear your opinions. And my second one is actually based on our results, because a lot of young people had changes in their emotional well-being, particularly with increased feelings of loneliness and some depression as well. And that's, I guess, made me think about how young people can interact with each other. So if a young person comes across a friend who might be experiencing feelings of loneliness, should they be trained in schools on how to deal with crisis intervention? So for example, suicide prevention training. Do you think this would be appropriate, or should it be the way it is now, that's just left to guidance counselors and professionals in schools? This question is just because I'm thinking that young people do have direct contact with other young people, so should they have any training on such a difficult but I guess needed topic, and what would you recommend on that? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asia, for your questions. So anyone that would like to comment on these questions? Dr. Serena, yes, you're welcome.
Yes, I welcome very much this question, because it gave to me the opportunity of to speak about the role of this specific profession, which is called the youth worker, and the role that the youth worker can play in the society. So he will not be the solution. But I'm against the idea that for this kind of problem you have one solution. This is quite impossible from my point of view, because complex problems should have also deep answers. But in any case, in our country, mainly speaking about the south of Europe, unfortunately, the role of the youth worker is still not recognized. It means that not only for this is a lack not only for this person, but also for all the system of educational, and also of the system of related with the youth support, and the important evolution from youth to adult age. So in this specific stage, researchers and politicians and so on, and the European Union adopted a lot of resolution, also the Council of Europe about it, but pushing member states to encourage this the recognition of this role. Is the main actor of the youth, the youth work is the youth worker. The youth worker can play a role between youth and the context where they are living with. So, for example, family, school, education, training at university, and so on. What could be done is also that adults should be trained to recognize the problem, because sometimes it's not easy to identify in one classroom, for example, or is not if you are not aware, if you are not trained for that, probably you can be the best teacher, the best, but maybe you're not able to recognize that in this classroom you have some person with problems. So the way to recognize should be encouraged, because it should be technically able to do it, and then to take the opportune measure, actions, and so on. So I think that the role of the external society, when I say external, I'm speaking compared to the university, the area where the university is running, or schools and so on. Then you have the society. When the youth go out, students go out of school or university, they are playing sport, they are dancing, they are reading, they are walking, they want to do things out. So their world should not be only within the university or the school, but because of they spend a lot of time, even in that environment, the system should implement the way how to recognize the problem and then how to solve it, to encourage the solution. Better relation with the families, with the peer education, peer experience. Let's grow up the voice of young people, encourage to speaking about this problem. When you have a problem, you should have a favorable environment to speak about it. Sometimes it's not easy. When we were obliged to stay at home, not always you find the right protection within your family. Sometimes problems are within the family, so you have to find a better support outside. But sometimes COVID gives also opportunity to reinforce the capacity to read the situation within the family. So, but we have a lot of experience to learn from this pandemic, which was not in our. We were not aware. We are lucky generation, because we didn't grow with pandemic, and this experience changed all of us.
Thank you, Dr. Serena. I must agree with you about the profession of youth work not being recognized, since I'm myself dealing with the same situation and the same problem here in my country. Whenever I go and tell them that I'm youth worker, they all look me strange, and they don't know what's actually that. So thank you, Asia, on your question. Thank you, Dr. Serena, on your feedback. Maybe anyone else that would like to comment or give feedback on Asia's question, please feel free to do it. Miss Elena, yes.
It's a very serious situation in Russia in good skills of school psychologists and social workers. In my opinion, not all of them have very high and good skills to work with youth to solve this problem. And I think one of good solution could be launching educational program what contribute to developing humanitarian skills such as empathy, non-violent communication, active listening, and so on. And for example, we have in Russia, and I know in other Red Cross, Red Crescent societies, they have the same program. This program for lonely people offer it's for elderly people, but I know some examples when the young people include in this program. In this program, we as Red Cross or Red Crescent find and create a couple of volunteer and some person who really need to communicate with somebody. And I think it's a good way to solve this problem. 3 things: high skills of social workers and school psychologists, a new educational program for young people to develop their humanitarian skills, and some special program from society, from local community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Elena. Senator Mary, maybe you would like to comment.
I was leaving me to last because I have another round of bells going, and that'll end it. So if you can bear with me, it should end in a minute. I suppose coming back to let's come back to your first question, and I think it's your research that that Minister Simon Harris was citing recently at the literacy, numeracy and digital literacy launch in actual fact. So I congratulate you on that. I also just want to maybe congratulate that the global research project methodology was set up by Professor Pat Dolan, who's been really, really extraordinary and showing great leadership in this area. Why is it not funded? I think pre-COVID, mental health was seen as something through a medical model and something that was confined almost to disabilities, rather than mental health being a mainstream, everybody needs to consider their mental health. So we put a lot of emphasis on resilience training, building resilience. And I have a love-hate relationship with that, because if you don't have resilience, it's somehow a judgment. And that as though it can be, whereas actually sometimes things are just difficult. And throughout COVID, thankfully the bells are gone, and throughout COVID, things have been just really difficult. You know, I've come to the age I am with the world pretty much running normally. You know, nothing mad has really particularly happened in my life, thankfully. So I hit this age before I realized that overnight the leader of our country would come out and announce that we were going to shut everything down. It was inconceivable. Then it suddenly happened. So if you're a young person and that suddenly happens, then you live with that for the rest of your life, of the possibility that it was an unthinkable thing for me. But if you're young, then that changes everything. It changes everything that you rely on. So what do we need? I think that one of the things that was absent, and what we clearly see in your research, is empathy. The beginning of COVID was almost an attitude to young people that you're young, you've all the rest of your life ahead of you. It is the older people and vulnerable people who are at risk of dying here. So just get on with it, suck it up, and we move on, rather than empathizing with that whole uncertainty and that shock of how the world can change overnight, literally overnight, and there is a need for empathy in that. So I think that one of the things over the last year is tackling this idea that if you say that you need support in your mental health, that's somehow stigmatized, and that we are breaking down that stigma. So if anything good could come of COVID, that's one of the things that we now see. Mental health is a mainstream focus, needs a mainstream. So, I mean, last year in the budget, 38 million was announced for new mental health services. And part of that was that response to COVID and to what we learned. And I know that Professor Dolan is overseeing a pilot scheme for looking at empathy as a program in schools. I trained as a counseling psychologist a long time ago. And one of our things was to have that understanding of the difference between just sympathizing, but really empathy is getting into what is that experience like for the people who are experiencing this, so that you relate to it at a very, very core level, and try then it would be more effective in how we respond. So I think that in that, you will see the funding coming through. You will see people like, in our case with Minister Simon Harris in higher education, really focusing on that and looking at, well, this has been a traumatic experience that sets in motion a way of thinking for the rest of everybody's lives. And so you don't have the decades of experience that maybe the rest of us have to come back from this. But if you have had that shock, then how do we do it? Well, we do that with empathy and understanding and coming from a place of going, this has been a really significant event for young people, and we shouldn't have any expectation on how they should respond. There should be no shoulds. That's the only should that's allowed, is that there should be no shoulds. And I think that sense of loneliness, isolation, people did their exams, online. They, for all of last year, many of the people in first year in college or went through a whole year of college without ever attending campus. So I think that even that experience, that personal development of going for a coffee, going for a chat, hanging out, all of that has been lost. So I think that we need to reinvest very much. We will see, we are expecting, and we're getting figures already on increases in drug addiction, increases in alcohol, and we're ready for a tsunami of reactivated issues like that, and we're preparing and using mental health services and looking for an increase in funding in next week's budget in Ireland. So we're advocating for that. So I hope that maybe answers some of your question.
Thank you a lot. Thank you a lot, Senator Mary. I must agree with Rochelle that Ireland seems really nice country, and I'm really happy to hear that you have a lot of this kind of programs that you have been introduced to the society. So I must congratulate you all the teams for the great work you've done, but also to encourage you to get those findings, have the feedback that you already had, and do some great work in the future as well. We also have one more question in the chat box. So we have here Lucila Menino. I'm sorry if I read your name incorrectly. So she's a PhD student in global studies on the Dante Alighieri University in the Calabria, Italy. She is excusing for not working her microphone, but Lucila, thank you for having the courage to pose the question. So I will read it now. It says, I don't know if anyone can answer me, but I have a curiosity. Have you found some relevance to the role of religion in connecting young people online during the pandemic? I mean, have young people found some kind of ritual to be together in the network to face the theme of death, for example? Have you found a website dedicated to this? Lucila, thank you for your question, and anyone that wants to address and to comment on the question from Lucila.
I'll give that a go.
Of course.
What a great question. I think that one of the challenges through COVID and one of the complaints that we experienced, certainly, is that places of worship could not be opened, places of coming together in community, you know, even that experience of, although it's a very Christian analogy, but you know, the breaking of bread, but all faiths and none have that experience of coming together as community, and the inability to do that, the inability of well-being. And one of the challenges that we negotiated, or we had to consider, was that traditional mainstream churches had buildings. Newer churches and newer maybe faiths to our shore didn't. They were relying on community centres, they were relying on places like that. So if you permitted churches to open, you would then be deciding that people who would maybe do mindfulness and get their support in a different way, and that they weren't getting the opportunity. So there were things that we used to argue about in private, well, on Zoom calls. You know, certainly as my group of Fine Gael senators, we would say, you know, yeah, but if we open the church, if we start advocating for churches to open, then what are we going to do? So as a result, the online aspect of your question, I don't know. I don't know. I have no idea of that. But certainly from the physical entry into coming into a space, a communal space, and that shared experience, I think a lot tried to move online. They tried to facilitate through coming together. I know of one church that did home groups and home studies and took themes, and they did all that through Zoom. So I think that the rise in virtual meeting was perhaps made things more accessible, and more people could attend or could dip in and out while the meeting was going on. I think where we're going to need input is how we commemorate, how we recover from this period. A lot of the ritual of loss and the ritual of the one thing the Irish are really good at is death. Actually, we have a whole ritual around death of commemorating, coming together, comforting, and mourning, expression of loss, and we would have a cultural background of keening of that remembrance. And of course, that was denied to families. It was denied that the comfort of families coming together was lost during COVID. And there will be mental health implications arising from that in how people haven't grieved. Or there were people who had losses of maybe children pre-COVID and then didn't have the support of family being able to call to their homes during the whole COVID period. So now we need to find a way, I think, as a country and as a people across the world, we need to find a way to be able to stand in remembrance of those we have lost and of the experiences that are lost. So in that, perhaps faith, religion, all faiths and none, will need to contribute to that conversation. And I don't know, in Ireland, we're thinking of maybe doing some sort of a constitutional convention, doing some sort of so that we can have a national conversation about it. And get then the voice of youth, the voice of elderly people who wondered would they ever walk down the street again, with, you know, who and so we're beginning to see television programs that go back over that experience. So I think that there will be a place certainly for religion and for commemoration and for ritual. We will need that as part of our recovery and coming out and coming to terms mentally and spiritually with what has happened to us in the last 18 months.
Thank you, Senator Mayer, for answering the question. We also have one more question from the audience. We have Ella, who is asking one question, and in the chat: how do we ensure the voices of young people aren't just tokenistic, and that recommendations and their voices will be heard and implemented by policy makers. Thank you, Ella, for posting the question. Anyone that likes to comment on this? Ms. Elena or Senator Mary, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Okay. I think in my experience when I was a little bit younger, it's easy to be listened when you're not alone, when you're part of some initiative group or of some youth organization. And I think in all governments, in all level of governments, in local, in federal governments, we have some special consult groups from youth people, and this is a good way to give your vision to politicians, be part of some youth group. This is my experience, because when you, if only one person, it's really hard to reach they. But if it's many people who have same ideas, same vision, and of course have some researchers to like a base of their opinion, I think it make it easier to reach a politician and to change situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Elena. Senator Mary, just a quick feedback on this question from you.
I suppose just really quickly on it, I would agree absolutely with everything Elena said. I think getting involved, making sure that you're in a youth group, that I think it's our job as parliamentarians to create the space to hear and to listen. We have joint Oireachtas committees that we invite people into to speak on, and we do topical issues to ensure that we're hearing, getting involved in political organizations as well, and ensuring that the youth wings and that you're influencing policy by being, and we have a saying from a disabilities perspective, which is nothing about me without me. But I think that actually applies to anybody the policy is being made for. And you know, we've come through a number of months of a care of the child policy lab where we have said it's not for us to make policy. It is ultimately, but actually it's for us to sit and listen. And we had 2,500 people contribute to that, who were people living the lived experience and telling us what they need. And then in that, also creating initiatives and ideas. And when you sit and listen to the ideas, actually new, innovative and exciting policies arise. And I think that's a formula for policy making that needs to be introduced by governments, so that we're listening and the policy comes from the ground up and isn't imposed from the top down, where people can be in a bubble of, you know, I get over 250 emails a day. I'm on calls, I'm on, you know, you can suddenly find yourself in a almost isolated away from real lived experience, and you're relying on the input of what people say to you. So creating the space in that public space for to listen to young people is something young people should be insisting on, and it's something the parliamentarians should be creating.
Thank you, Senator Mary. And since we're getting to the end of this session, we have time also for one more question. So I think that Magdalena has a question. Magdalena, can you hear us?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Magdalena Pachoha, and I am from the same European group as Francesco. Therefore, this was supposed to be a bonus question for me, which actually ends up being very similar to Ella's question. But this conversation makes me remember that actually in our questionnaire, 9 out of 10 participants actually said that they do express their opinions in relation to COVID, but they do express them on social media. And as Senator Mary already said, some social media cater more towards, you know, different age groups. So for example, if a young person expresses their opinion on TikTok, it's almost like they are talking into an echo chamber. But the problem is where for example, we also found that actually very few young people actually talk to government officials or to public officials. The percentage was very low. And at the same time, the trust in the media decreased during pandemic, especially for young people. So some of the recommendations that our team made was, of course, that broadcasters should take responsibility, and of course that, as you mentioned, that youth should be empowered, and you also, Senator mentioned that there should be a space for young people. But I'm pretty sure that in the audience there are young people who actually think about how they can get engaged and how can they get out there into traditional media, so that their role and that their point of view can be expressed. And I'm wondering if any of the panelists have any advice for those people who want to be activists and who want to get out there to express their opinion, not just into their echo chamber.
Thank you, Magdalena. Ms. Elena, Senator Mary, if you'd like to address and comment on this question as well, you have a few more minutes.
I absolutely agree with Magdalena, because it's like in prevention program, you should use places and channels and language for use and create it with use, for use. And if we will use our traditional channels, of course, young people have no opportunity to listen us. And of course, it's very, very important. Thank you, Magdalena, for
Thank you, Ms. Elena, and Senator Mary, some final words.
Okay, I agree with you. I think that because of the algorithm, it is an echo chamber if people are speaking into social media. That said, I wouldn't rule it out. Our researchers, our support staff, sometimes even us, when we dare to go on social media, because it's quite a toxic place for particularly female politicians. So I tend to post and then mute my conversation so that I don't see the horrendous things that get sent to me. But I think that, but I do scan what is topical. I do scan what's trending. I do look at what and try and seek out channels for where young people are speaking. I do try and do that, so that, because I feel the responsibility. One of the things I was taught in training in counseling psychology was you must know people in every decade. So you must know people under 10, between 10 and 20, in each decade up to, whatever the top one is. If you do that and you were in contact, then you keep your thoughts relevant, and you keep your thinking relevant. So I think that we have official channels. We do have youth parliaments in Ireland. We do have a children's parliament that's run by the ARC project in Temple Bar. We do have conduits by which there are ways of addressing Parliament and getting your message across. But I also think, especially post-COVID, and from the learning that we've had in that, we need to create formal spaces to listen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Magdalena. Thank you, Senator and Ms. Elena, for briefly answering this question as well. As we have a few more minutes to end up the session, I would like to thank you all for your active participation in this research to action and knowledge sharing meeting. I would like also to encourage you to join all the following sessions, especially the global sessions as well, on the same topics, so you can discuss also with your peers from other regions the same questions you have. I would like to thank Senator Mary, Ms. Elena Petrova, and Dr. Serena for their participation as youth advisors and panelists on this session and sharing with you the feedback. And I would also like to congratulate all the teams on the hard work they've done in the past year, and encourage them to continue doing a great job. Thank you all for your active participation, and I really hope to see you soon. And I'm really glad that we had such a fruitful discussion. So good afternoon, good evening, and hope to see you all again soon. Thank you very much.